From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's today's lineup. K-State's John Holman will take a look at several principles of cover crop production for grazing purposes in the High Plains region, which are featured in a new publication on the topic from K-State and Colorado State University. John will talk about species selection and calculating stocking rates, among other things. Also, K-State's Leah Tsoodle will go over some of the key findings of the just-released 2019 Kansas Pasture Leasing Arrangements report, based on a statewide survey of landowners and tenants on the particulars of pasture lease agreements. And later, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. All that and more here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Thanks for listening in to another Agriculture Today. Such continuing interest in cover crop production in Kansas, we want to share with you right out today information that's been collected in a new fact sheet, which was produced by specialists and scientists at Kansas State University and Colorado State University. It looks at managing spring-planted cover crops for livestock grazing in the High Plains region. One of those who contributed to this work is joining us now via phone. John Holman is a cropping systems agronomist for K-State based in southwest Kansas. John, this publication, before we go into some of the finer points within it, is a really handy resource for producers, it would appear, in as far as utilizing cover crops for grazing purposes.
It sure is, Eric, and as always, it's a pleasure to visit with you and producers across the state. You know, last several years, we've had an increased interest in using cover crops, and our research would suggest that growing those cover crops for forage provides the soil health benefits that growing cover crop does. But by growing it for forage, we also can have the economic benefit of that crop. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
And we'll tell folks how to get a hold of the full publication, but let's go through some of the categories that this publication covers, including selection of species. Well, that's always an interesting question, isn't it, John?
It is, and there are a lot of species out there. You know, the broad categories, grasses, brassicas, legumes, and if we're looking at something geared towards the livestock production and forage production, then we also need to, be thinking about what's going to do well for that animal as far as producing good quality forage that doesn't have possibly some toxicity issues associated with it. So we want to be careful at the type of species we select. We also want to grow something that produces a lot of tonnage, so we have a lot of feed for that animal, and is also cost-effective to buy the seed and grow the crop.
So when you think of species selection, does one want to go with a single or two species, or go with a greater mixture, the cocktail approach, as they say?
Well, that's an excellent question, Eric, and there's differing opinions on that. But our research has shown that we can accomplish the objectives in terms of soil health. That would be increasing organic carbon, reducing soil bulk density, increasing water infiltration, improving soil aggregate stability. By growing a species that produces a lot of tonnage, and not necessarily by growing a lot of species. Oftentimes in these mixtures, if we plant 6 or more species, 1 or 2 species dominates that mixture, and you have a lot of species you plant that you never see growing. And so, if we plant it and it doesn't grow, it really didn't do us any good. But what it can do is actually cost us a lot in terms of seed cost, because some of those species are a lot more expensive to purchase than a simple species such as, say, if we're talking spring crops, like a spring oat or spring barley or spring triticale.
And, of course, we are talking, for spring planting purposes, cool season species here. There is, in fact, and you cite this in the publication, a decision tool that producers here in Kansas can use out of the Midwest Cover Crops Council on species selection, and you might briefly touch upon that.
Yeah, Eric, that is a very valuable tool that producers can select their objectives of growing the cover crop, whether that's for forage or it may not be for forage. If it's for nitrogen fixation, for example, they would lean towards something like a spring pea or a spring lentil if we're planting this spring. But yeah, that's a very valuable tool that myself and others have contributed towards. And so it provides a lot of good information on determining what species to grow. We want to grow this cover crop, forage crop, as a true crop to get the most benefit from it. So that means if fertilizer is limiting, we need to correct for soil fertility. If we're growing the crop for forages, as I mentioned, we need to think about possible toxicity issues. And so we do have another publication that lists potential toxicity concerns. And so one of those would be if any species really can accumulate nitrates. And so, that's just one example. We need to be thinking about potential nitrate accumulation in the crop and just be thinking about how to minimize any potential negatives. But really, there's a lot of good choices growers can use to grow a spring crop. And a lot of that has been planted in the past month, but we still have another 3 weeks here yet where growers can still plant that crop. We've had good moisture across most of the state, and so we have good moisture to get that crop up and growing. And it fits in the system well where people can put cows out on that spring crop or before native pastures come on. And so that can be a very valuable resource for grazing standpoint. It can also, by giving our native pasture a little bit of a rest, that can help the native pasture grasses do a lot better in the long run by putting cattle out on forages. And then also by doing that, a lot of people by growing annual forages have been able to increase their stocking numbers. They can run more head by doing that.
You also address in this publication, John, the variability that's often found in the forage production of these cover crops and how producers might manage that variability. And it gets to the question of just how long one can viably leave stock out on a cover crop and graze. What's the window of grazing time typically available here?
Sure, that's another excellent question, Eric. So really we have 3 different windows. We have fall planted cool seasons, and that would be something like winter wheat or winter triticale. We could plant radishes in the fall as well with that. Or if we're talking about the spring plantings, that could be spring oats, would be common crop. And then also we have the summer forages. So the yield potential and grazing windows varies by each planting time, but the spring crops, they are the smallest grazing window of opportunity of all 3 because the crop matures fairly rapidly as we transition from spring to summer. So we can expect about a 30 to 45-day grazing window by planting a spring crop. And the yield potential will vary a lot based on the precipitation and the temperature as we transition from cool to warm. But we can expect anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 pounds of dry matter production per acre. And based on your area, we can come up with an amount of rainfall you would expect to receive. We can come up with a pretty good estimate of what to work with. And from that estimate, we can either calculate the number of head you need for the number of acres that you have available, or the other way to do that is based on the number of head you have, calculate how many acres are required to meet that need. And so we have another tool available for that, for determining stocking rates.
It's called the Carrying Capacity Calculator by name, you tell us. And you say that's an excellent tool for that very purpose.
Yeah, that allows the producer to make those calculations up front so they can meet the forage and livestock balance.
So that's also noted in the publication how to access that. And, of course, John, producers can go about the grazing in a number of ways. We won't dwell on this terribly much, but continuous grazing versus rotational grazing versus strip grazing, that's up to the individual, obviously, and there's something there that can be tailored to each situation, it would appear.
Yes, every operation is going to be different in terms of where they're going to be implementing this practice, in terms of what the fencing and water situation is, the number of head, et cetera. So there's just a whole multitude of different scenarios. But, we can turn cattle on and graze it continuously, or we can strip graze. By strip grazing, we can increase the utilization and have a little bit reduce our forage loss, the trampling loss. But then you also have to weigh that against your labor constraints. Depends on the producer. That's the best way to answer that.
Well, all of this in much greater detail than we have the time to get into today is captured in this new fact sheet out of K-State and Colorado State University. How might producers get a hold of a copy of it, John?
Yeah, it's available through the K-State website. They can contact me or any of the other authors, either in Kansas or Colorado. Joe Broomer, Sandy Johnson, Augustino Bohr, Megan Shapansky, and Keith Harmony are other authors, or they can contact their county agents.
If you'd like to go online, you can find it directly as well at the K-State Research and Extension bookstore. And what you're looking for by title is Managing Spring-Planted Cover Crops for Livestock Grazing Under Dryland Conditions in the High Plains Region. It's an excellent reference, producers, if you're entertaining the idea of sowing a cover crop soon for spring grazing. John, keep up the good work in this area, and we will undoubtedly pick up on this topic once again on down the line. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you, Eric.
John Holman with us, cropping systems agronomist with Kansas State University. We'll return with more on this Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care positions, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned to Agriculture Today. Well, helpful new information is out now from the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State for those interested in grassland management in Kansas. This is an effort by the Land Use Survey Center in the Department of Agricultural Economics. Its director, agricultural economist Leah Tsoodle of K-State, joins us now. We're talking about, Leah, the 2019 Pasture Leasing Arrangements in Kansas report, which was just posted. You might explain, before we get into some of the interesting details out of the report, what it's about, a general overview of its intent, if you would.
Well, Eric, what we conduct this survey for is to understand pasture use and practice in Kansas. Pasture land is Kansas' second largest ag land use, and it supports the beef and sheep industries. The sales of cattle accounts for about 58% of the total market value of ag products sold in Kansas. So pasture land is pretty important to the economy of Kansas.
Without a question. How is this report generated? As you alluded, it's done via survey, correct?
Yes, the Land Use Survey Center that I'm the director of, we generated the survey instrument with the support of Kansas Department of Revenue, and we distributed it through multiple outlets, including Ag Manager and the county extension offices.
And it's something that you don't do every year, but every few years. Is that correct?
We do it once every 4 years. We try to get it to all the corners of the state.
To break this down, what pasture categories are covered in this survey then, Leah?
So we cover native pasture, also known as rangeland, and there's 3 categories for those. There's tall grass prairie, mixed grass prairie, and short grass prairie. We also cover tame pasture or improved pasture, which primarily consists of non-native grass species such as smooth brome, tall fescue, and Bermuda grass. Recently, folks have been planting some native species in their improved pasture and managing it as they would the non-native species.
So comprehensive in what you cover here. And you do factor in, you say, what is obvious, the wide variation we see in Kansas in pasture productivity driven by rainfall amounts and other variables. So you try to work that into this evaluation.
Right. That's exactly right. The type of pasture, as you stated, varies across Kansas primarily because of rainfall and the soil types. And for this survey, we divided the responses into the 9 crop reporting districts assigned by the National Ag Statistics Service.
Well, that's what the survey is. What were you seeking in the way of information then? There's a great lot to gather there, it would appear.
Well, there is a lot to gather, and so we greatly appreciate everybody who, it tends to be a little bit of a longer survey, because we are trying to gather quite a bit of information. We include questions on the grazing outlook, the pasture availability, leasing rates, and also delve into fence building rates.
Let's pick through some of that, if we might.
Okay.
The variations in the kinds of leasing arrangements. What do you find out there in as far as the agreements that pasture managers and those who might lease the pasture work up?
So the majority of leases for native pasture in 5 of the 9 crop reporting districts that I mentioned were full summer leases. Full year leases were predominant in the Southwest District and the South Central. So if you picture Kansas divided into 9 segments, you can look at the Southwest quadrant and then the South Central quadrant, and that's where the full year leases were, and that's for native pasture. Partial summer contracts were more popular in the eastern Kansas crop reporting districts, so that's the eastern third of the state, and that's largely due to double stocking practices that they have in those crop reporting districts. 3 of the 9 crop reporting districts had full summer contracts for tame acreage, and 4 of those crop reporting districts, tame acres were under full year contracts, and in the Central District, tame acres were primarily under partial summer contracts. So largely we see for the state in general, full summer leases and full year leases were definitely more utilized than the partial summer contracts.
But they're adopted on the basis of growing conditions once again, in a great part here. Mm-hmm. Trends in stocking rates, you measured that as well?
We did, and the stocking acreage for both cow-calf and stocker operations were higher for native pasture relative to tame pasture in all districts except Southeast 90, and that's as you would expect. And the stocking rate acreage was higher in western districts, also, as you would expect, and higher in western districts than in eastern districts because, as we talked about, the grazing potential increases as you move from west to east.
What most are greatly interested in would be trends in rental rates. And
as always.
As always. And you've examined this by differences region by region and by pasture type.
Yeah.
What did you find there in general?
So the rental rates of pasture in Kansas, as we've talked about and we continue to hammer on, but this is very true. We're highly correlated with temperature and rainfall patterns. As we know, increased grass production potential influences the rental values. And so, as we would expect, cash rent increased moving from west to east and from south to north. Rents were higher in 2019 for both native and tame pasture than they were in 2015.
Can you point to why they were so much higher in 2019 then? Was there a specific reason for that?
In general, I think that we have seen the land values for pasture kind of hold steady, whereas we've seen cropland kind of drop down a bit. And so I think that's probably reflective of the strength of the pasture values and the strength of the market for pasture land.
The maintenance costs for pasture, something that isn't talked of all that much. Folks don't really invest a lot of thought into what it costs to manage a pasture, but you did look at that, and you broke down how those are absorbed by the parties, the landlord and the tenant.
Yes, and it's interesting to look at the cost side. A lot of people just think about the rental rates, but don't really delve into the specifics of their particular lease and how to break those expenses down between the landowner and the tenant. So what we found were the pasture maintenance costs were higher in 2019 than in 2015, as you would expect. And they were higher for tame pasture than they were for native pasture, also as you would expect, because of the intensity of management that goes into the improved or tame pasture. The landlords generally pay for the majority of fence material costs, chemicals for brush and weed control, and water supply costs. Tenants primarily paid for fence labor and chemical and fertilizer application costs.
Noting again, these are trends. We will find differences in those agreements throughout the state, but that gives a general notion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These are just averages, and that is not specific to any particular lease.
Now, we've touched upon some of the highlights here, Leah. There's much more to this report. How would you hope that pasture managers and grazing managers could use this information?
Well, as I said before, Kansas pasture land is very important to the Kansas livestock industry and state economy as a whole. And we hope with this report to provide timely information to landowners, to the operators, to extension personnel, to lenders, and to policymakers, give them timely information to help them make more informed decisions. And that's how we hope this report can be used.
It is a terrific resource for that purpose. It is posted online, presumably, by now.
It absolutely is. It is online at agmanager.info.
agmanager.info. And it's really a good read for anybody with interest in how pasture management trends fare in the state of Kansas. It's entitled The 2019 Pasture Leasing Arrangements in Kansas, co-authored by our guest, and we appreciate the word on it, Leah, and congratulations on another effort that takes quite a bit of doing to make this come together.
Thanks for letting us get the word out, Eric. I appreciate that. I appreciate that opportunity always.
We appreciate your time very much. She's the director of the Land Use Survey Center in the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University, Leah Tsoodle. Find the full report, and it's an interesting read, at agmanager.info, 2019 Pasture Leasing Arrangements in Kansas. We'll step aside now for a few minutes. When we return, we'll have today's agricultural news headlines for you. That'll include a report from Scarlett Hagens on beef promotional efforts to consumers in this current mode of social distancing. And again, standing by, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. Please keep it right here on the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, broadcasting from what otherwise remains a very quiet campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, with the deal reached in Congress now, the USDA will have more funding to craft an aid package in response to market losses sparked by COVID-19 that would include livestock producer aid. The deal struck between Congress and the Trump administration would inject roughly $2 trillion into the U.S. economy. Among the aid to specific industries, a $14 billion boost in funding authority for the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation. That would allow the USDA to provide more direct aid to producers. That, according to a spokesperson for an agricultural organization, which was shared with DTN earlier today. The legislation also includes a $9.5 billion assistance program for livestock operations in particular. Now, more details are expected later today as the specific language on the legislation becomes available. While agricultural markets have rebounded some this week, both livestock and grain markets have lost significant value for producers since mid-January, when the world first began seeing the spread of COVID-19. Agricultural groups had written congressional leaders yesterday asking for specific aid. The Senate is now expected to vote on the package later today. The House would have to be recalled to vote on the package unless House members can agree to vote by unanimous consent. One of the final areas battled over late last night was funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, the single largest food aid program in the country. House negotiators had pushed for a boost in SNAP aid, but the Hill was reporting that language did not make it into that bill. And the bill creates $500 billion of direct corporate aid. Small businesses would have access to roughly $367 billion in loan programs. The caveat that they keep their workers during the coronavirus crisis. If employers continued paying workers, the loans would be forgiven, according to the Washington Post. The bill also includes $25 billion directly for the airline industry. For most Americans, they would receive checks of $1,200 per year if they earned less than $75,000. That would be based on 2018 tax returns. Married couples earning less than $150,000 would receive $2,400, and every child claimed on a tax return would be worth another $500. The bill would also provide $130 billion for hospitals, as well as $150 billion for state and local governments, according to the New York Times. The USDA and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative yesterday announced continued progress in the implementation of the agriculture-related provisions of the U.S.-China Phase 1 Economic and Trade Agreement. The USDA's Rod Bain reports.
The latest update on progress of implementation of the U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal from an ag perspective.
I think China, in the technical aspects, is doing what it needs to do to prepare to fulfill their commitment.
And Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, in a joint press release from USDA and the U.S. Trade Representative's office, noted some of the more recent actions of implementation. Among those, regionalization allowing U.S. poultry exports from areas unaffected by highly pathogenic avian influenza or virulent Newcastle disease, access of all U.S. beef products into China for the first time since 2003, as well as expansion of pork products into that market. An updated list of eligible U.S. exporters of distillers' dried grain allowed into China, and facilitating the registration of U.S. animal feed manufacturing facilities by China to allow import of these products into that market. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, most noteworthy for the beef cattle industry, China notified the U.S. of proposed maximum residue levels for 3 hormones commonly used in U.S. beef production. This recognition by China of safe and science-based U.S. production methods particularly benefits trade with China in beef, which is a fast-growing market, importing $8.4 billion worth of beef in 2019. And again, U.S. beef producers, for the first time since 2003, will have access for nearly all beef products into China. U.S. pork producers will also be able to significantly expand the types of pork products shipped to China. As per the agreement, China expanded its internal list of U.S. beef and pork products eligible to enter its ports, including processed meat products. On the beef and beef products list, China removed all references to age restrictions. That's in line with its announcement that conditionally lifted restrictions on beef and beef products from cattle aged 30 30 months and older. The USDA estimates that American cattle producers could export up to $1 billion per year under this improved trading environment. Amid the coronavirus concerns, the Kansas Beef Council remains vigilant in the need to educate consumers on the benefits and importance of choosing beef as part of their diet. Scarlett Higgins tells us here that consumer outreach has focused on nutrition and cooking from home.
As families adjust to more time at home, the Kansas Beef Council is offering tips and ideas for how to cook beef with the kids, batch cook, and make the most of leftovers to ensure meal planning is stress-free and packs a nutritious punch. Planning saves time and money and can help families reach daily nutrition goals. In addition, checkoff-funded programs are leveraging digital advertising to help position accurate information and research on beef's role in a healthy and balanced diet. As a result, recipes, cooking lessons, and virtual ranch tours will be offered online. To learn more about the work KBC is doing to actively engage with consumers, visit www.kansasbeef.org. On a national level, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is closely tracking consumer sentiment specific to coronavirus and any concerns that might impact beef safety or consumer demand. So far, none have been noted. Although 80% of consumers say they are concerned about the virus and what is happening with the economy, they trust the food system. The NCBA Consumer Marketing and Research Team is adjusting current checkoff funding advertising, media relations, and grassroots advocacy programs to reinforce beef's nutritional profile and how it contributes to healthy diets. I'm Scarlett Higgins.
And a quick congratulations here to K-State weed scientist Vipin Kumar of K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hays. Vipin has received one of the top awards for young professionals during the meeting of the Weed Science Society of America and Western Society of Weed Science. They named Vipin as the recipient of the award for Outstanding Early Career Weed Scientist. He's been at the Hays Center since 2017, and great accomplishments on several weed-related issues there. So congratulations to Vipin Kumar for that recognition. This is Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
The whole experience reminded me of the book Old Farm by Jerry Epps.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I do not know how they do it, because for a beaver to walk on land must not be fun. It's not easy. And then there are the coyotes. So when I walked by the wildlife pond on the farm last fall, I was surprised by the devastation I saw. I stood in awe. I softly said, "Wow." Along the edge of the small pond, short white stubs stood out, all stubs of what once were growing trees, including the bald cypress I had planted. I was not too disgusted, even though I noticed the chewed stump of the tree I had planted in celebration of a good friend who had died. I will plant again, and I'm sure the tree will send up a sprout. But looking at the chewed-off trees, I saw the opened-up treescape as an act of nature. As my friend Cliff used to say, it is what it is. It surely was, and still is. The pond is isolated and not connected with the creek which runs through the farm. It collects and holds water from a few hills, a small watershed which follows a rivulet. By ponding up water with a man-made dam, the field below can be farmed, grow crops, and now hay, good brome. But over the years, trees have sprung up around it, and a short distance along, the extended dam is a small cedar tree woodlot with beautiful cedars. It's a dark woodlot along the overflow. The walking and riding trail winds through it. Small as it is, it gives the evergreen sense of woodland and is a warm place in winter for deer. And mind you, the pond is not large, at best when full, a good half acre. But it is habitat. And I planted a few pin oaks along its southern shore. Luckily, I had protected the young trees with a woven fence. But I have to do better, as I saw a few teeth marks on the bark. There was one good-sized tree, a pre-existing oak, which was chewed on from both sides, and I expect would soon topple over. Another night's chewing, and down the tree would come, undoubtedly debarked and food stashed, as well as twigs cut off. Willow and aspen are beaver's favorite, but if you're hungry and have to feed a litter, I assume that young oak can be very tasteful as well. When I shared my findings with a friend of mine who is a wildlife biologist, he offered to catch the offending beaver before he or she would start on my cedar forest. I gladly accepted. Many years ago, he taught me how to catch live beavers, and I've been successful in catching two and releasing them where there was plenty of space and plenty of water. I can still see the dive taken after release and hear the splash of the big flat tail. I still wonder today if that last act was a sign of disgust or gratitude for being released in such paradise. Whatever it was, a loud splash, the sound that old trappers heard on approaching a beaver pond. Beaver pelts did, and probably still do, bring money. Originally, beaver skins were traded for merchandise. I read that the height of a pile of skins was equal to the length of the musket set with its stock on the ground for which it was traded. A wool blanket was worth 6 beaver skins. As the value of the beaver skins rose, the Hudson Bay blanket carries only 4 points, each point or marker being equivalent to a beaver skin. I have a Hudson blanket, but I don't remember how many points it has. I know it is heavy, warm blanket. Visiting my friend, he said he needed a live beaver to do some good engineering work in a location where too many cottonwood saplings had grown up. There had been an old beaver colony before, but they were gone. The live beaver was to be set out to start doing what beavers love to do, chewing trees and transforming that area in a big marsh again. We agreed that we would go and try to catch my beaver in a live trap. But winter slipped by fast, and when March came, February was gone. But 2 weeks ago, we drove out to make our catch. I had only one stipulation. Being later in the season, the chance was that if we caught a female, she might have a nest with young. If we caught a lactating female, we would release her on the spot and let her raise her litter. It could be 4 or 5. My friend brought his high waders, and after stepping into them, walked slowly around the small pond, stepping carefully around the stumps. We noticed that all the old chewed off stumps were dry. When I had seen the work in progress in the fall, all stumps had been shiny wet, with sap oozing out. That was not the case now. On careful inspection, we came to the conclusion no more beaver, so no live trap was set. We located the den, and my friend stood on the roof, which was reinforced with spread-out twigs. It's something I will have to look at, as it does weaken the man-made dam. As we gazed back over the pond, we concluded that there were no beavers, presently. We drove to the north end of the farm, where I had seen other beaver activity. It, too, is a wildlife pond. It's the pond where I likely will take a dip on a hot summer day. But there, too, no current beaver activity. So we went home. The whole experience reminded me of the book Old Farm by Jerry Epps.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. As always, thanks for tuning in, and please be back with us here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.